Hello, everyone, and a massive welcome to another episode of the Easy English Room podcast, brought to you by the team at Speak English from Zero to Fluent. It is absolutely brilliant to have you tuning in with us today as we dive into a topic that seems to be a permanent fixture in human conversation, no matter how much technology evolves. I'm Emma, and I'll be your lead host for today's session as we explore the world through English.
And I'm Henry, your co-host, and I'm just as excited to be here in our London studio. Our mission, as always, is to ensure your journey toward mastering English isn't just a series of boring drills, but something that's actually engaging and, dare I say, a bit of a laugh. Today's debate is a real classic. We're looking at the age-old tug-of-war between city life and country life.
It really is the ultimate divide, isn't it? We want to know if you're the kind of person who feels most alive amidst the constant movement and noise of a metropolitan hub, or if you're someone who spends their workdays daydreaming about a quiet cottage hidden away in the hills. That's exactly what we're going to unpack today. And I'll be honest right from the start, I'm standing my ground for the city. I love the energy, the bright lights, and that incredible 24/7 convenience where everything is just a tap away on your phone.
Well, you knew this was coming, Emma, but I'm going to be the one waving the flag for the countryside today. To me, there's nothing that compares to the absolute peace, the stillness of the air, and the raw beauty of the natural world. I mean, honestly, who really needs 1,000 neon signs when you can look up and actually see the stars in the night sky?
Look, Henry, I'll give you the stars. They're lovely to look at. But let's be realistic. Stars aren't going to deliver a hot pepperoni pizza to your door at 2 in the morning when you're hungry. I mean, come on. You have to admit that cities like London have absolutely everything you could ever want, from world-class entertainment and career opportunities to every type of food imaginable. It's a level of convenience that's almost impossible to argue against, isn't it?
You'd be surprised, Emma, because I think I can make a very strong case for the other side. We'll see how you feel once I start talking about breathing in actual fresh air, having wide open spaces to yourself, and never having to sit through a soul-crushing traffic jam ever again. The countryside has some massive perks that people often overlook, so I'd suggest our listeners stick around. This is definitely going to be a lively and perhaps even a slightly competitive chat today, but we shouldn't reveal all our best arguments just yet.
I agree. Let's keep some of the best bits for later. So, listeners, wherever you are, grab yourself a nice cup of tea, a coffee, or maybe even some of that fresh farm milk Henry loves so much, because this episode is going to be packed with surprises. Let's kick things off with a big question for you to ponder. Where do you honestly think you'd find the most happiness? Would you opt for the high-octane pace and the endless professional doors that open in a city? Or does the idea of a close-knit community spirit in the quiet countryside sound more like your speed?
That is such a fundamental question, and to be totally honest, it's something I've wrestled with quite a bit over the years. I remember back when I was at university here in London, I took a week to visit a close friend who had moved to a tiny, remote village. For the first 48 hours, it felt like a fairy tale. The air was so clean and the silence was magical. However, by the third day, I was practically climbing the walls with boredom because there was absolutely nothing happening. I realized very quickly that I missed the hum of the city, the vibrant energy of the streets, and most importantly, I missed being able to walk 2 minutes to find my favorite coffee shop.
I can certainly see why you'd feel that way. But interestingly, I had a completely different realization when I went through something similar. A few years back, I spent a full month living right in the busiest part of London. Don't get me wrong, the initial excitement was through the roof. But after a few weeks, the nonstop noise, the packed pavements, and the total lack of any personal space really started to wear me down. I eventually found myself desperately craving a simple, quiet walk through the woods back home where I wouldn't see another soul. What about you, listeners? Have you ever felt like you were living in a place that just didn't fit your personality? Or have you ever seriously considered packing it all up to move from the city to the country or the other way around? We'd love to hear your thoughts once the episode is over.
Oh, and before we get too deep into the debate, we should definitely mention the free PDF we've put together for this episode.
Spot on, Henry. It's a really useful resource that's full of all the major points we're covering today, along with a great selection of vocabulary words and some practice exercises designed to help you level up your English.
Exactly, and you can grab that right now by clicking the link in the description below. It's the perfect tool if you want to follow along with us in real time, or if you'd rather save it for a proper review later on. Definitely don't miss out on that. Now, Emma, let's start with the big one, convenience. Cities are literally engineered for it. In 2026, you can get groceries delivered by a drone in 10 minutes. Stores are open all night. And if you want sushi at midnight, you've got 10 different places to choose from. Everything you could possibly need is right there at your fingertips.
I can't deny that cities are incredibly convenient, but I think we have to acknowledge that this convenience usually comes with a very high price tag. You're looking at sky-high rents, the constant temptation to spend money on things you don't need, and those delivery fees that really add up over time. On the other hand, in the countryside, you have the opportunity to grow your own food. It's fresh, it's organic, and in many ways, it's basically free.
Free is a bit of a stretch, isn't it? That's only if you don't value your own time, because you have to spend hours planting, weeding, and eventually harvesting everything. To be honest, not everyone has the patience or the skill for that kind of farm life, Emma. I've managed to kill every single houseplant I've ever bought, so I don't think I'd last a week as a farmer.
Well, that's fair enough. But I think living in the countryside teaches you a certain kind of resilience that you just don't get in the city. You actually learn how to fix things yourself, how to produce your own food, and how to live in a way that's truly sustainable. In the city, most people would probably call an expensive repair service for something as minor as a leaky faucet or a broken shelf.
That might be true, but the city is a massive time saver. If I'm in the middle of cooking dinner and realized I've run out of onions, I can just pop down to the shop around the corner and be back in 5 minutes. If you're in the countryside, that same errand could easily turn into a 20-mile round trip.
You're right about the distance, but I'd argue that at least that drive is filled with beautiful scenic views, instead of the usual London experience of honking horns, endless traffic lights, and massive potholes. But let me ask you a serious question. How much is all that city convenience actually costing you? Between the rent, the dining out, and the transport costs, doesn't it feel like your bank account is constantly being drained?
You've got a point there. Cities are undeniably expensive places to live. However, you have to look at what you're getting for that money. You're paying for access to incredible opportunities, better paying jobs, and some of the highest quality education and resources in the world. Sometimes that extra cost is a very smart investment in your future.
Perhaps, but look at the trade-off. In the countryside, for the same price as a tiny, cramped apartment in London, you could own a massive house with a beautiful garden. Plus, you don't need to pay for an expensive gym membership when your entire backyard and the surrounding hills are your gym.
I see your point, but not everyone actually wants a giant backyard to maintain. Some of us really value having a cozy apartment where everything, work, friends, and nightlife is within walking distance. But let's talk about something the countryside really does well: community. Out there, neighbors actually know who you are, they help each other out, and the whole village comes together for festivals. It's like being part of one big extended family.
That does sound very charming, but to be honest, it can also feel a bit invasive for some people. In a city like London, you have the luxury of true privacy. You can live next door to someone for a decade and never even know their name. And for a lot of people, that kind of anonymity is a massive blessing.
I hear you, but don't you think that same anonymity can make cities feel incredibly lonely? You can be surrounded by millions of people and yet feel like you don't have a single real connection. In the countryside, you might have fewer neighbors, but the relationships you do have are often much more meaningful and deep.
I can agree with that to an extent, but the city offers a level of diversity that you just won't find in a small village. You're constantly meeting people from every corner of the globe, experiencing different cultures and trying out things that wouldn't even exist in a rural setting.
That's definitely true. Cities are absolute hubs for new ideas and diverse experiences. However, in the countryside, you feel much more grounded and connected to long-standing traditions, and you're always surrounded by the calming influence of a much slower pace of life. And while we're talking about the environment, we have to be honest about the air quality.
Oh, without a doubt, cities really struggle with things like pollution, heavy traffic, and the constant noise from construction and factories. All of that definitely takes a toll on your health over time.
Exactly. And in the countryside, you trade all of those negatives for crisp, fresh air, clean water, and the actual sound of birds singing instead of sirens and car horns. It's a much healthier way to live in so many different ways.
But remember, cities also give you access to the best gyms, specialized yoga studios, and stores that focus entirely on health-conscious products. You can absolutely maintain a very healthy lifestyle in the city if you're willing to put in the effort.
That's true, but I'd argue that nothing really beats a morning run through a quiet forest, or eating a salad made of vegetables you just picked from your own garden. Nature itself is often the best kind of therapy for the mind and body.
I'll give you that, but I think city life teaches you a different kind of balance and mental resilience, which are just as important for your overall well-being. Speaking of finding things to do, let's talk about entertainment. In the city, you are absolutely spoiled for choice. Whether it's a world-class concert, a new play at the theater, an art gallery, or a different restaurant to try every single weekend, there's always something exciting happening just around the corner.
And in the countryside, the entertainment is more nature-focused. You've got hiking, fishing, stargazing, or just gathering around a bonfire with friends. Fun doesn't always have to come with a ticket price attached to it.
True, but I wonder how many times you can go on the same hike before it starts to feel a bit repetitive. In the city, there's a constant stream of new things to discover.
Well, have you ever actually spent a whole night around a bonfire just sharing stories with good friends under a clear sky? That kind of experience is priceless and never gets old. Also, we have to talk about healthcare. Cities have the absolute best hospitals, the top specialists, and incredibly fast emergency services.
That's a very fair point, but I'd argue that the countryside lifestyle actually promotes better health in the first place. Between the fresh air, the better food, and the much lower stress levels, people often find they need to visit the doctor far less frequently. Even so, we have to admit that when a real emergency happens, having quick access to top-tier medical care can be a total lifesaver.
I completely agree with you there. But we can't overlook the fact that city living is often synonymous with constant stress. Deadlines, traffic, and noise never seem to stop. In the countryside, you get to wake up to the sound of birds singing, not some neighbor honking their horn outside your window. Now, Emma, let's shift gears and talk about families. I've always heard that the countryside is the perfect place to raise children. What's your perspective on that?
I think it's a great environment in many ways. Kids get to grow up with so much space to run around, plenty of fresh air, and they develop a really strong sense of being part of a community. They learn very practical life skills and strong values from a very young age.
That's all very positive, but what about their education? Cities like London have the best schools, an incredible variety of extracurricular programs, and the latest technology at their fingertips. Kids in more remote areas might end up missing out on some of those significant advantages.
You're right, but rural schools often have a much stronger focus on essential life skills, like teamwork, problem solving, and even gardening. It helps kids grow up to be very grounded and resourceful individuals.
I see your point, but once those kids become teenagers or young adults, the city starts to look a lot more attractive. It opens so many doors for them, internships, networking, and social clubs that can really help them find their path in life.
I understand that, but cities also bring a lot of pressure, social competition, materialism, and a constant feeling of needing to keep up. In the countryside, young people can often focus on simpler, more meaningful goals without all those urban distractions. And while we're talking about meaningful things, let's look at the environment. Countryside living is almost naturally geared towards sustainability. People are more likely to grow their own food, use solar energy, and be very conscious about recycling. It's a way of life that's in much better harmony with the planet.
I definitely agree with the principle, but I think cities are starting to catch up quite quickly. We're seeing more rooftop gardens, urban farming initiatives, and buildings that are incredibly energy efficient. Most of the big green innovations actually start in cities, and that's going to be crucial for our future sustainability as well.
That's true, but the sheer volume of waste that cities produce is still a massive issue. In the countryside, people tend to live with a lot less, and there's a much stronger culture of reusing and repurposing items rather than just throwing them away.
That's a very valid observation. But let's not forget that cities are the birthplace of green technology. Whether it's electric vehicle infrastructure, smarter public transport, or advanced solar grids, the city is where these solutions are developed. It's not a perfect system, but it's a constant cycle of innovation. And speaking of tech, we have to talk about connectivity. Cities have the fastest internet and are the hubs for all the latest digital services that make life so much more efficient.
I won't argue you on the speed of the internet, but being constantly connected to a screen has its downsides. In the countryside, people actually have the chance to step away from their devices and engage in real face-to-face conversations. That kind of balance can be incredibly refreshing for the soul.
It sounds very peaceful in theory, but let's be honest, if the Wi-Fi goes down in a rural cottage, people tend to panic just as much as they do in London.
You've got me there. But maybe that's just a sign that we all need to spend a bit more time disconnecting and just enjoying being in nature. And that brings us to mental health. Countryside living is naturally much less stressful because you've removed the traffic, the deadlines, and the noise.
That is a wonderful benefit, but is there also a risk of feeling isolated? Being far away from your friends and from professional opportunities can lead to a real sense of loneliness. Cities, despite their flaws, offer a huge range of social activities that help people feel like they belong to something.
You're right, but as we said before, the city can also be a very lonely place even when you're surrounded by people. I think both lifestyles really depend on how you personally manage your social needs and your need for quiet time. And let's not forget the fun factor. Cities are just packed with live music, theaters, and massive sporting events.
And in the countryside, you have the great outdoors for fishing, hiking, and those famous bonfires under the stars. You don't always need to spend a fortune to have a great time, Emma.
Very true, but city entertainment is constantly evolving. There's always a new experience waiting for you.
I agree, but for me, nothing will ever compare to the absolute peace of a quiet night in nature. That's the kind of experience that really feeds your spirit. Well, Emma, what an incredible conversation we've had today. I think we've given our listeners a lot to think about today.
We really have. I think I've made a pretty strong case for the countryside, but you've definitely brought up some very solid points about the benefits of city life. Even if we don't agree on which one is better, I think we can both agree that our listeners have picked up a lot of great English today.
Speaking of picking up new skills, it's now time for everyone's favorite part of the show. Emma, should we bring her in?
Absolutely. Listeners, it's time for Laura, our resident vocabulary expert, to help us break down some of the key language from today's episode. Laura, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. It's Laura here. I've been listening in and I'm so excited to help you master some of the vocabulary from today's debate. Let's get started. First, we have convenience. This refers to the state of being easy, useful, or practical. For example, in 2026, having an AI assistant to manage your schedule is a massive convenience. Next up is self-reliant. This means you are able to rely on your own powers and resources rather than those of others. For example, by moving to a remote area, she became much more self-reliant and learned how to maintain her own home. Then we have the phrase spoiled for choice. This is when you have so many great options that it's actually difficult to make a decision. For example, when I looked at the menu at the new London bistro, I was absolutely spoiled for choice. Our next idiom is to burn a hole in the pocket. This means to spend money very quickly, often on things you don't really need. For example, if you keep buying those expensive gadgets, it's really going to burn a hole in your pocket. We also heard cost of living. This is the amount of money you need just to afford basic things like your home, food, and getting around. For example, the cost of living in a rural village is usually much more manageable than in a major city. Next is melting pot. This describes a place where many different people and cultures mix together to create something new. For example, London is a true melting pot where you can find food and traditions from every country on Earth. Then we have sustainability. This refers to methods of living or working that don't damage the environment and can be kept up for a long time. For example, the new urban housing project is a great example of modern sustainability. Another one is stress factor. This is simply something that causes you to feel mental or emotional tension. For example, for many people, the long daily commute is their biggest stress factor. Next is therapeutic. This means something that has a healing or very calming effect on you. For example, many people find that spending a few hours in a quiet park is incredibly therapeutic. Finally, we have reuse and repurpose. This means taking something you already have and finding a new way to use it instead of throwing it away. For example, she decided to reuse her old glass jars as candle holders and repurposed her old ladder into a bookshelf. Now, here is a challenge for all of you. Try to use at least 2 of these words in your own sentences today. Write them down, or even better, say them out loud to a friend. Practice is the only way to make it permanent.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was incredibly helpful, as always. Honestly, the way you explain things just makes everything so much clearer and easier to understand. I'm sure our listeners found that just as useful as we did. It really helps to hear these expressions explained in a simple, practical way that we can actually use in real conversations.
It really was. I completely agree with you, Henry. Those words and expressions are absolutely perfect for talking about this topic in a natural and confident way. And listeners, don't forget to check out the PDF we've prepared for you. It includes even more examples, extra explanations, and simple ways to practice what you've learned today. Well, that's just about all we have time for in this episode of the Easy English Room. We've certainly covered a lot of ground today, from the fast pace and energy of London life to the calm, quiet beauty of the countryside, and everything in between.
Yes, we really have covered quite a lot today. It's been a very interesting discussion, and hopefully it gave you some new ideas to think about as well. At the end of the day, whether you're on Team City or Team Countryside, the most important thing is finding the kind of lifestyle that truly makes you feel happy, comfortable, and fulfilled in your everyday life. Everyone is different, and that's completely okay.
Exactly. And that's what makes this topic so interesting.
We'd also really love to hear from you. What about you? Are you more of a city person at heart, or do you find yourself dreaming about a peaceful life in the countryside? Maybe you've experienced both and have a preference. Tell us your story in the comments. We always enjoy reading your thoughts and experiences. And of course, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the Easy English Room podcast so you never miss a new episode.
That's right. We're here to make your English learning journey as fun, enjoyable, and practical as possible. We want you to feel comfortable using English in real life step by step. So until next time, keep practicing as much as you can. Stay curious and don't be afraid to make mistakes. That's part of the learning process. And remember, we're right here with you on your path to fluency.
And just before you go, remember that your progress doesn't have to stop here. If you'd like to keep improving, you can click on the next video or explore some of the other episodes we've carefully picked out for you. There's always more to learn, and we're here to help you along the way. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.